All right, everyone, welcome to the July 24th, 2025 Payroll Restoration Community One Big Beautiful Bill Act breakdown of what does no tax on tips overtime mean to people who process payroll. I do have a little presentation, so I'm just going to share my screen. All right. One Big Beautiful Bill is also called Public Law 119-21, which was signed in barely at the last minute by President Trump on July 4th, barely meeting the July 4th self-imposed deadline for having the bill passed. What does it mean for us people who process payroll? There's some changes that were made to the 1099 miscellaneous NEC and K. There's no tax on tips. There's no tax on overtime. This is the one that I am actually excited about. The 1099K thresholds are reverting back to the previous amounts of $20,000 or 200 transactions, meaning that now, again, some sellers might not receive a 1099 from the merchant processor for all payments. This does not mean, however, that the seller won't need to report sales on their tax return. As always, all business income and all business expenses always need to be reported on the business tax returns. And starting for payments received on January 1st, 2026, the threshold for non-employee compensation and many 1099 miscellaneous categories will change from $600 to $2,000 and will be adjusted for inflation after 2026. I just want to talk a little bit about the history of 1099s. They were first introduced in 1954 and the threshold was $600. So it hasn't changed at all since the first 1099 reporting requirements were introduced. And I think this is a good start, but I do want to point out that if OB3 had actually indexed fully for inflation, it would have changed the threshold to $7,200, not $2,000, but it is a step in the right direction and will eliminate the need for a lot of 1099s, which means that accountants and bookkeepers can go back to focusing on other tasks and hopefully have a less stressful January 2027. So, no tax on tips is retroactive to January 1st, 2025. So, this means that we need to start advising our clients right away to make sure their payroll software is set up correctly to have tips as a separate pay type, but most should already be set up this way. I know what you're thinking. Let's all lower our fees and have our clients tip us. That won't work. One, we're business owners, and two, it's only for certain industries that have relied heavily on tips in the past, such as barbers, hairstylists, rideshare operators, and people in the hospitality or service industry, such as servers and bartenders. Tips will need to be separated from the rest of the wages on the employee's W-2, and it only applies to federal income tax and not Social Security or Medicare taxes. There shouldn't be changes as to how tips are run through payroll if tips were already reported separately, and most tips are because they're tips in, tips out, because they're just added to be taxed, because most tips traditionally and still most tips are still paid out in cash either every day or every week when the employee is done with their shift. Employers are required to provide statements of tips to the employees, and this can likely be done on the pay stub. However, we are waiting for clarification, which will come out later this year as to what the appropriate what that requirement actually means. And the taxpayer can deduct up to $25,000 of cash tips, and there will be phase out limits that we'll discuss in a couple of minutes. Cash tips are not just cash, but also include anything that is cash equivalent, such as credit card tips, and excludes things such as tickets or merchandise. If the employee does not report their tips to the employer, the tips do still need to be reported on the tax return, but are not allowed to be excluded from taxable wages. So this no tax on tips only applies to tips that are reported to the employer and run through payroll. Again, no tax on overtime is retroactive to January 1st, 2025, and applies only to qualified overtime, defined as overtime on earnings over 40 hours per week. Overtime will need to be separated from the rest of the wages on the employee's W-2, and like the no tax on tips, applies only to federal income tax and not Social Security or Medicare taxes. There aren't really going to be any changes on how tips are run through payroll, just how they appear on the tax forms, because overtime is paid out at time and a half and is typically set up as a separate pay type in order to make the calculation correctly on the W-2. But right now, it overtime goes onto the W-2 and on the 941 on the same line. But with overtime not being taxable, it does need to be split out on the W-2. And the taxpayer can only deduct up to $12,000 for single and $25,000 for joint taxpayers. And there's going to be phase out limits that we're going to discuss next. All right. So this is probably the part that you've been waiting for, is the rules. No tax on tips and no tax on overtime are currently available only for tax years 2025 through 2028. And phase outs begin when the modified adjusted gross income is $150,000 for individual taxpayers and $300,000 for joint filers. It requires that tips and overtime wages be reported separately on the W-2 and possibly on the 941. The 2025 W-2 draft is not available yet, and I will keep you up to date on what that will look like when it's available. And quite honestly, I don't know yet if there's going to be another variation of the 2025 941, but I am relatively positive that there will need to be. I haven't heard yet how quarter one and quarter two 941s, which have already or will soon be filed in the next week, be handled. But whenever these new forms drop, I will be doing walkthroughs of the updated forms as soon as they become available. Why should you care? We're just accountants. We don't do taxes. But because these deductions require precise reporting of payroll, we do need to go in and make sure that our client's payroll is going to be set up correctly and keep up to date with how whatever payroll platform you guys use is implementing these changes. Some, if the pay codes are already set up correctly, you won't have to do anything. You'll just have to just take a look, make sure things look how you expect them to look. And it possibly will affect workflows. I don't anticipate it really affecting integrations, but I would definitely keep an eye out on your integrations to make sure things aren't breaking and running broken for a long time. Because the sooner you catch something that's not working correctly, the easier it is to correct it. And because the no tax on tips and no tax on overtime is effective retroactively to January 1st, 2025, that means that timely implementation is essential. So, what's next? Like I said, the payroll software systems will make sure that they have the flow to the form set up correctly. That will happen in the back end. But probably the biggest thing to do is to educate your clients on documentation and reporting changes for the W-2s and the 1099s, and prepare clients for the IRS's upcoming guidance. So, right now, my advice to everybody is to make sure that you've got pay codes for overtime, you've got pay codes for tips, and that they're not the same as the regular hourly or salary pay code. And when the software sends you the alert at the end of, I'm anticipating at the end of next quarter, but definitely in December or early January when the W-2s are going to be available, that either you have your client add to your scope of taking a look at making sure the W-2s are properly filled out for all of your tipped or overtime employees, or ensuring that somebody at your client's office is going to indeed take a look and know what they're looking at on the updated W-2 to make sure that tips and overtime flow through from the payroll software correctly into that form. And you can always follow me for more updates and news like this. I still am reading a lot of payroll tax forms on the YouTube channel.